Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being on our program. I'm Armando F. Sanchez. We have two wonderful guests, Thelma T. Reyna, someone I call my friend and someone also is a mentor. And we're bringing in somebody from Australia, Michael J. Leach, Ph.D. He's an Australian poet, reviewer, and academic who works at the Monash University School of Rural Health. So we call it from the world down under, but that's not correct because we could be down under. So anyway, but it's from Australia. Yeah. So we're connecting today on this program and discussing a very vital program, really important. His background is he writes poetry, Poetry of the Planet, Anthology of Imagined Futures. He does a great deal of poetry, also some in Antarctic Poetry Exhibition. He's been part of those exhibitions, Melbourne, mental health, on and on and on and on. So we applaud his work in many areas of writing composition, and mainly as a poet today, researcher at the university, but really more of a humanitarian from the time that I've had to talk to him and get his background. We also have Thelma T. Reyna as a guest. She is, again, as I mentioned, a friend to the world, especially the poets and writers. She helps a lot of people become writers. She is the chief editor and editing consultant at Writing Prose and the indie Golden Foothills Press, both based in California. And she is a poet laureate in Altadena. She was in 2014-16. And the main part of I want to share today is she is a recent recipient of an award for her wonderful book on poetry on healers. We're going to talk about that as well. We're going to ask her about that. So Thelma and Michael, thank you for being on our program today.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Same. Thanks so much.
Now, let's begin with Thelma. Thelma, you contacted me and you shared and you said, I'm impressed with Michael and his work, what he's doing down there. So tell us your background. What stimulated you to take such important interest on Michael's work?
Well, I found out that Michael Leach, and this is the first time that we see each other in person. We've been communicating a lot with emails. That he had just written this wonderful book called Natural Philosophies, and he'll show that to you. And that he is a medical practitioner. He has a Ph.D. In the medical field. And so this was along the lines of my recent book. I think the books probably came out at about the same time. My book, Dr. Poets and Other Healers, which I co-edited with two real medical professionals, Dr. Johanna Shapiro, a psychologist, and Dr. Frank L. Maskins Jr., an oncologist, both of whom were professors at the time I met them at UC Irvine for 30 years, very distinguished in the medical field, doing a lot with poetry, doing a lot with medical humanities, particularly Dr. Shapiro. So I had just, we, the three of us had just issued this book. So I was very keen on getting to know more about Michael, learning about his book. And so we started communicating with one another, and we saw a commonality in the work that we were doing and the interests that we have regarding creative writing, poetry, the medical field, and how these two blend and whatever. So that's my side of the story. I'm very delighted to say that I have really, really cherished these experiences of interacting with Michael.
Yeah, I feel the same way, Thelma. I've really appreciated chatting with you via email and now meeting you face to face on the screen. So it's wonderful to be in touch with someone with whom I share these passions for medical humanities, for a more holistic view of medical and healthcare practice, and a way that healthcare professionals and patients can can be seen as humans, and to interact with one another in a way that can promote healing for the patients, the practitioners, the families of patients as well, and the carers of patients. We're all on this journey of life together, and I think it's important to think of ways that we can experience shared humanity, and that can happen through poetry, for example.
So how does poetry connect both of you, even though we're in two different hemispheres? You know, what is the draw of the need for poetry for both of you?
I feel like where I'm in Australia, the medical humanities and medical poetry are just starting to be recognized a bit, but I feel it's more advanced in the United States of America and other countries, and as evidenced by this anthology of Thelma, Doctor Poets and Other Healers, that there's this body of work in the medical humanities happening there that can really perhaps be translated to Australia, and I'm really interested in knowing more about that and interacting with you to discuss the medical humanities, and perhaps if I have anything that I've experienced as a health professional or poet that could be of interest to you, then I'm happy to share and collaborate as well. Well, I feel poetry connects Thelma and I on a very human and professional level, because each of us in our own right are poets, and also people who work with the medical profession, work with medical professionals and poets. Would you agree, Thelma?
Yes, I think that's it. That's it exactly. And I'd like to add a little bit more from my end of it. To me, poetry has always been about hope and healing. It's not necessarily a word you've mentioned yet, but poetry has always been an integral part of life. Whenever there is difficulty, whenever there is grief, whenever there is sadness, and when, Lord knows, if we're dealing with in the health field, you're dealing with life and death, Michael. And so there is a lot of sadness and grief and loss and fear that I believe is probably experienced in the health field, in the medical field. And so it's a natural. Poetry and grief and healing, I think, are natural entities, even though probably society doesn't necessarily connect the two as much as we have been trying to connect.
Let me ask a question. How did both of you find poetry and find it to be a healing process for both of you? I know that Thelma does it for other people as well, helping them to write. And I know you write for yourself in your own right. And Michael, you do it not so much only for survival, but also to be able to become more empathetic. How did you discover poetry as being an outlet for that?
Well, I first came across medical poetry by reading a journal here in Australia called the Medical Journal of Australia. And there's a reflection section in which poetry has been published. So I saw medical poetry for the first time then, and felt that reading that helped me to better understand medical situations and to see a more human side. So as a way to connect the health and medical sciences to the health and medical humanities, to give true holistic health and true holistic medicine. And I started reflecting on my own experiences as a student and a practitioner in health, and my particular health profession is pharmacy. And this led me to write a poem called Longitudinal, and that's about a long-term patient journey undertaken by a particular individual. And I thought I would submit it to the Medical Journal of Australia to see if they would publish it, and I was pleasantly surprised when they did, and that kind of started it all for me and started me down the path of learning more about poetry, seeing if it could help me and perhaps help others. And I do now incorporate poetry into my teaching at Monash University, and we run regular haiku poetry workshops for medical students. So as a way to get them writing poetry and to see if it can help them to perhaps help them be more empathetic.
Thelma, how about yourself? How did you enter into the field of poetry and find it to be a benefit to you?
All my life, basically. I remember as a teenage girl, I kept not fancy journals necessarily, but I wrote poetry on my own. Teachers didn't have to tell me to do this. I think ever since I was exposed to poetry in school classes and literature books and class discussions, it just resonated with me. I mean, I think such is poetry. I think that poetry has always been the language of people, of civilizations, of concerns, of fears, of hopes, of dreams. Some of the greatest people who have walked this earth, poetry has been part of their lives. And so to me, it was natural to just, fall in love with it and pursue it and just utilize it throughout my whole education and my whole life. I became an English teacher, a high school teacher for 16 years because I wanted to teach literature and poetry to my students and to help them understand the beauty and the applicability of poetry to people's lives. It applies, and everyone uses it. And by the way, coincidentally, and I think this will kind of underscore the connection between what we've been talking about, medical humanities, and that, how I first met Johanna Shapiro and Frank L. Maskins is that they have for 5 years straight run a very prominent, wonderful symposium at University of California, Irvine, which was their professional home until their retirement. They have for 5 straight years run an annual, hugely successful symposium called Poetry for Hope and Healing. And they have literally connected the two so strongly, brought together people from all walks of the medical field, from all walks of life, and presented this stupendous conference to the world. And that is how we met, because last year they asked me to be the keynote speaker at the symposium. They needed a female poet. They needed a Latina female poet. And I was recommended, and that's how I got into their little orbit. And that's how eventually, for the subsequent, this year's symposium, that's how this book came to be. So they're very hands-on, showing the connection between hope and healing on such a big, big stage, and recruiting all those people. That is how we got the material, the inspiration, and how we eventually put this book together. So in my mind, there's no question, they are inextricably linked. Hope, healing, poetry, illness, medicine, they're just hand in glove.
Michael, you mentioned that, you share some of these common traits that Thelma was talking about. Do you find it that it's something that is commonly shared among the medical professionals in Australia, or is it sort of something that's barely coming through?
This is something in the Australian context that's just sort of starting to come through. So the medical humanities is quite advanced in the United States of America. I understand that there's a big long list of universities that run medical humanities programs, whereas in Australia, there's really nothing formal within health and medical degrees. So from my experience, I studied pharmacy, and we had a single lecture on the history of pharmacy, and that's as much humanities as I got in my 4-year pharmacy degree. And I think that there is room for those sort of breadth subjects that students could take within a program to learn more about literature, history, these different aspects of medical humanities. And the literature component could include poetry, which is very much a person-centered form of writing. You often have the I in poetry. You're thinking about the individual, and you can shape the poem as you want. The individual's voice can really come through strongly in poetry, from my perspective.
A question off my top of my head is, how many medical schools do you have in Australia? You know, you mentioned pharmaceutical, but also medical or nursing or etc. This is a very tough question to ask right off the top of your head, but can you give us a general idea? Are we talking about maybe 1,000 people involved, or there's, 600 programs? I don't know. I'm asking you.
We've got, in Australia, we have 7 states and territories. Usually there's about 2, maybe 2 to 3 medical programs in each capital city of those states and territories. So we aren't talking many compared to the United States, I wouldn't think. There's still that need for the humanities to be in those programs. And maybe it could be something that's delivered across universities. Maybe a consortium of universities could collaborate to deliver medical humanities programs centrally through to all the universities. I'm just thinking out loud there, but
Sure.
Maybe that's a way to do it.
Thelma, what would be your suggestion for the Australian base professionals?
Well, I think Michael's got it. There is power and maximal effectiveness in numbers. So the United States being such a bigger country, of course, as he says, there's so many more universities, so many more medical students. So it has been much easier to institutionalize the medical humanities programs. And when you're dealing with smaller populations, things are harder to plant and to grow. So, but I think it's a matter of time. I think, and it's also a matter of quality. So it's not how many people they're going to be having in the medical humanities, but it's just how excellent are their programs? How successful are they? So I'm very hopeful.
This is a general question to both of you. The whole concept of having the humanities as part of the medical training and evolution, is it something that is immediate, that really needs to be done now, or something that can gradually be incorporated? That's question number 1. Question number 2 is, does this only benefit the doctors, or would it also apply as a benefit to the other levels as well, the support systems, i.e. nurses, people that work in laboratories, etc.? Would they also benefit from what you've discovered to be the benefit of poetry in this whole idea of medical humanities?
I feel like there would be a need to introduce the medical humanities gradually in the Australian context. So some universities do things informally, they're sort of extracurricular activities. that's the way it's sort of starting to be integrated now. But I feel like it would need to be a gradual process to build that up over time to something more formal. And I do feel that this could benefit not only doctors, but also allied health professions, pharmacy, dentistry, support staff, like health workers more generally. I feel like that it is applicable and potentially useful right across the health sector.
Right, and I do believe that in the United States, it is applicable to not just to the physicians, but to various other, practitioners in the different fields. And I think I agree with Michael that when something is new, oftentimes it's a little bit frightening, it's a little bit intimidating, and sometimes change has to be instituted at a slower, more patient pace. But I think in America or the United States, I think it's moving swiftly, or pretty much so, and I think that is very appropriate, because it's already been instituted enough. There's a critical mass of people who have taught it, who have studied it, who have utilized it and implemented it. And I think that when you've got that type of momentum, you just have to keep going and going, because it's being shown to be effective.
Is there another country in the world that is also looking at this in depth and looking at it and saying, we need to figure out how to apply this as part of our medical training?
I think the UK is doing well in that space too, better than Australia. And I think as the US, UK, and other countries do this to a greater extent, so they do incorporate medical humanities into their programs, the evidence base behind the benefits of including medical humanities in medical programs, the evidence behind medical students writing and reading poetry, I feel that as that evidence base grows in certain countries, other countries then will see the benefits, will be able to see journal articles reporting those benefits, and then be more likely to start the medical humanities programs themselves within their own universities in Australia and elsewhere. That's my feeling.
And I agree with that. And I do believe that it is definitely not just one country or another. I don't have a list of countries or anything like that, but I do believe that it is more universal than we believe. And Michael is making a great point about evidence-based. When the programs are going on in different places like this for so many years, the results and the evidence do begin to pile up to show how effective and how desirable it is, and that in turn propagates the program. So it's no monopoly on it anywhere, I think.
One thing I have a side question on this is the idea that poetry is a form of, I'm treading on the thin ground here, that poetry is a form of creative writing. I'm talking to poet. Okay, I'm safe on that one. Wow.
Yes.
I was wondering about that one. I was shaking on that
form.
Okay.
Big part of it.
So does it have to be poetry per se? Can it be also creative writing? I know that Michael wrote a book as well. We want to talk about that in a few moments. So can it be beyond just poetry and more?
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, remember that the operational term is more creative writing than poetry when you think of medical humanities. So when you look at creative writing, it covers everything basically that is not a newspaper article, a factual report. So when you're talking about, and even that can be creative, because there's creative nonfiction out there as a genre now. So creative writing is any writing in whatever genre you choose, whatever format you choose, in which the writer is being more free to express feelings, emotions, things that are not just cold, hard facts. If you're dealing with just cold, hard facts, such as a scientific report on an experiment, that's not called creative writing. But once the subjectivity and the emotions and the personal involvement of the author come into play, then it can be called creative writing. And that's why we have personal essays, stories of these doctors and nurses with their own experiences with patients. And you're going to hear a couple when we get to the reading.
Yeah, we're going to have a reading. Thank you. And Michael, could you tell us about your book, please?
Certainly. So my book is Natural Philosophies, and that's out in Australia on the 1st of November 2022 through Recent Work Press. So that's a Canberra-based publisher. And so this book is about health, really, in a word, health and healing. So there are poems about the health experiences of people, as well as poems about the health of the planet, so planetary health. And there's a connection, an important connection between the health of the planet and the health of us humans. And I explore that in 2 sections of the book. The first section is called Planetarian, and the second section is called the biopsychosocial model. And so that's a model in medicine where there's a connection between the biology, the psychology, and the social environment of people. Yes, so there's an exploration really of what it means to be human through the lenses of health and science in my book.
Each of you are going to do some readings of your poetry, and I'm looking forward to that. So let me see if I captured what both of you are saying. And what I'm hearing is the idea that the medical field has a very scientific side to it, i.e. facts and facts and facts and more facts and more facts and more facts. And this is labeled A, B, and C. And medical student is involved in this world for 4 or 5 years very intensely in order to get their degree. But what I think I'm hearing both of you saying, Michael and Thelma, is that we have to bring back into the formula the human side, the human emotions of the healer as well as the healing. And without that, if we leave that out, all the facts and figures about the medical health really is always incomplete. Am I understanding this correctly?
Yes, I would say so. It's important to have context for anything. It's important to think of the people behind the numbers, behind the scientific facts. There's not just one standard model, not one standard pathway that a particular person will follow. The person needs to be considered as an individual. And the same goes for practitioners. There's individual practitioners too, and everyone has their own lives, their own emotions that they need to take into consideration and process.
I agree, and Armando, I think that you stated it in very clearly, like in layman's terms, in a humanistic way. I think that if physicians or all these medical practitioners who deal with facts and objectivity so much, if they were applying that knowledge to a machine or a computer exclusively, and forget the human element and everything that medical humanities deals with, but all that knowledge, all that science has to be applied and utilized to benefit a human being. And so the more that the practitioner, the utilizer of all that knowledge has about that human being, I think the better he or she will be able to help and to heal that human being. So you can't function, you can't treat human beings without really trying to understand them and to relate to them and to have the compassion and the intuition and everything that human interrelationships cover. So yeah, you have to have both.
Human beings are so complex, and the inner workings of human beings on so many different levels, so many different spheres, the biological, the psychological, the social, the emotional, the practical. What you see may not necessarily be the full story. So I think that practitioners, health practitioners, really need to think about complexity and to lean into uncertainty through the arts, and maybe the arts, creative writing being a type of art. Maybe creative writing can help health practitioners to tolerate uncertainty and to be more comfortable and to process what they experience when they're practicing in the real world.
Exactly. And just to add a little bit more to that, just the engagement of these practitioners with literature writ large, with all of creative writing, as well as the arts and philosophy and psychology and history and everything else that's part of medical humanities. Their engagement with it stirs their creative and analytical and intuitive thinking. So they are becoming better understanders and better thinkers in the process. So they're developing their own critical and analytical skills, as well as enjoying the writing and as well as understanding the person better. So it's a very intellectual thing as well. It's not just having more compassion for that person, but it's literally better thinking that they have developed.
This is, like you say, it's a healing process for a very complex problem, that we're dealing with emotions not only of the patient or patients and family related, but also the internal part of the healer, i.e. whoever the professional happens to be, that they have to maintain their balance between the stresses, especially brought about by the pandemic, where it came so fast on those individuals, and then to be able to maintain their balance so that they can continue for the next day. So this is extremely critical, both of you, what you're both sharing with us in the public realm as well. And hopefully this message will carry on to other professionals in other fields as well. There is a section here where we want to do some readings, hear your readings from both of you, from your work. This would be a great time to hear it. Who would like to go first?
Michael, could you please go first? I never like to go first.
Certainly, yeah.
Thelma, that would get you in trouble in the classroom. I always went first because I figured there was nothing to compare me with. So I always
sat toward the back. I always sat toward the back of the class.
No, I always sat in the front.
My college classes.
Michael, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I might just say a few words about this poem before I read it. I'll read one poem now called Fractional, and that's an ekphrastic poem that's responding to a digital photograph of the same name by a friend and colleague of mine, Australian multimodal artist Marie B. Lee Donny, whose work ranges from photography to hi-fi ceramics. So her photograph showed 3 layers, the sea, land, and sky, in black and white. And my poem refers to that photograph. So that's the ekphrastic part, ekphrastis, meaning inspired by the art. And my poem also refers to the 4 classical elements defined by ancient Greek philosopher Empedocles. And this piece was exhibited alongside Marie's photograph in a physical gallery space as part of an exhibition called CoLab here in Bendigo last year. And Marie sadly passed away in March this year, 9 months after I wrote Fractional. And I will always remember that Marie said this piece captured the essence of her artistic vision and gave her chills in a good way. So I'll just read that to you now. Each one of us is elemental and fractional, a constituent part, or perhaps parts, of Empedocles, 4 classical elements. Some may ask what parts we are. The scientists may say we are the water that comprises such high proportions of our body. The morticians may say we are the earth from whence we came and into which we will return. The athletes may say we are the air through which we rush and deeply breathe all the way to painted line. The artists may say we are the fire that burns within the ancient kiln of our being. The philosophers may say that the actual human fraction of Empedocles' classical elements is exactly 4.
Beautiful. That's one of my favorite poems in your book, by the way, Michael.
Well, thank you so much.
Okay, I'd like to share this one. I have a very short one, and then I have a, well, I'll just go ahead. This is one of the students. She's, I'm sorry, not a student. She's a researcher, Radhika Stan, a Ph.D., Dr. Radhika Stan, and it's called Absent and Present. I came home, Father, but I have missed you. COVID has kidnapped you for good, and I can only replay ad infinitum that last phone call and that last FaceTime minute. You of breathless words, so lonely, waving from an ambulance bed on the way to your final home. I came home, Father, months after you'd left us, looking for your presence, fighting your absence, not able to cry in front of your tombstone, and not able to unmiss you in the garden, overcome by words, by the book stack on your bedside, by your coffee cup on the table. I felt your absence where you were in the cemetery. I felt your presence where you were not, on the right side of the sofa, in the hen house picking fresh eggs for our simple family dinners, under my arm walking to the market to buy peppers, in the pictures of us from decades ago exploring the Carpathian Mountains. I am at home, Father, alone with your absence and your presence, with the poems you scribbled like prayers in your notebook, mourning you and millions we have let go in the chokehold of COVID. Why have we, the world, broken into many when we fought one virus?
Wow, that's so powerful. Beautifully
Yes.
read too.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Radhika Stan is the author.
Wow. I am a student of both of you today, and I'm seeing more the need for healing at a whole new level. It is, like you say, past the formulas and the dissection of the body, but it's also the emotional side that can be incorporated to heal and brought about a more in-depth and long-term health benefits from your work in literary areas. I have a question for Michael. It's from Susanna Farrow. She is an author. She is in New Zealand, and she wrote a book. She asked the question for Michael. Michael, how has your style of writing changed over the years? So I want to give that a few moments to answer that question for Susan.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. So I suppose when I started writing poetry about 10 years ago, my style was quite metaphorical and playful, a bit experimental. And I used a lot of shapes, patterns, and other visual effects on the page. And the first little batch of poems that I published were concrete or visual poems. And over time, I think my style's become a bit more literal and inclusive of poetry types beyond that concrete poetry. And mostly the poems I write now can be considered non-fiction poems. I now write quite a lot of poems in traditional Japanese forms. So these are, many of them are shorter types of poems called haiku, as well as haiku-like poems, tanka and renga. And they feature quite literal visual imagery inspired directly by real-world observations and memories. And in my book, Natural Philosophies, each of the two sections opens with a haiku sequence. And Natural Philosophies also contains a renga about the catastrophic 2019-20 Australian bushfire season, a renga titled Summer Air, which I wrote in collaboration with a science communicator and poet here in Australia named Reyna. And that poem highlights the effects of the bushfires on the planet, on the environment, animals, and humans through the destruction of houses, the smoke flowing across the country and affecting people's breathing. And so my poetry style has shifted more towards ekphrastic poetry too. So I write poems inspired like visual artworks, like that one I just read. And there's also some poems I've written that have been inspired by songs. So yeah, I think I've got various influences, but the real world experiences of myself, of family members, of fellow health practitioners and of patients have remained central to my work. So I do often write non-fiction poems inspired by medical and health practice.
Unfortunately, we're coming to the end of the show, so I'd like to ask two questions. Number one, could you give each of you give us information about your book, if you can highlight it for us again, and tell us where we can find your fantastic books. And number two, your closing statements for this wonderful show. I wish we had, tons of time to go on, but unfortunately we don't. So let me go back to Thelma. Thelma, could you begin first of all to share with us where we can find your book, and then we'll turn it to Michael.
Thank you. Again, the book is Dr. Poets and Other Healers. And the subtitle, which we had not mentioned, is COVID-19 in Their Own Words. And to me, this is what makes this book special. It has 51 writings in it, 10 personal essays, 41 poems, and 26 authors from all fields of the medical profession. But the key thing is they are talking directly to us about their experiences fighting COVID in the second year of the epidemic. And so this is straight from their hearts. We see what they experienced, what they thought, what they feared, their losses, etc. So I think it's a very special book. And this is available through the press's website, Golden Foothills with an S, goldenfoothillspress.com. And you can learn more about this, and you can see who all the authors are, and you can get it there. And it is $18.95, and it's got about 130 pages in it. So thank you very much for this.
And let me share, it's also an award-winning book. We'll talk about that. Michael?
Thank you.
Thank you, Armando. Thanks, Thelma. So this is Natural Philosophies. So my first full-length poetry collection, and it contains 40 poems across about 86 pages, and two sections, as I mentioned earlier. So the first section is planetarium, and the second section, the biopsychosocial model. These poems are really about human experience. So human experience of health, humans, as well as the health of the environment. You can purchase this book through Recent Work Press. It's available for 19.95 Australian dollars. I'm not sure the exact conversion rates for the US and elsewhere at the moment. So that's available to order online. So thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you both about this and to talk about my book.
And I think that both of our books are also available on Amazon, of course, amazon.com. I'm a big supporter of indie bookstores, mom and pop stores. Nowadays, you can walk into practically any bookstore, tell them the book that you would like to purchase. If they don't have it, they can go on their computer and they can order it for you. And so you can get these books as well, I believe, through book, at least here, my book, you can get it through an indie bookstore. That's your favorite store, Barnes & Noble, whatever. Amazon.
Our closing statements.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, first, Armando, for inviting us and for having us on your show. And my dear thanks to Michael also for agreeing to be on this show, all three of us together. And I have totally enjoyed meeting Michael in person, so to speak, in person, and hearing and seeing more of his poetry and hearing him read his poetry. So it's been very special for me. And thank you, Armando, for everything that you do for so many authors for so many years. You are an indefatigable supporter of the literary arts. And I think that the impact that you're having on people and your contributions to our knowledge of all of these wonderful human beings is great. So thank you for that. And I hope that our audience will also feel the same way.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful and privileged for this opportunity to speak with you both today and to speak with the viewers of this show. I'm passionate about medical humanities, health humanities, poetry about medicine and health, and poetry more generally. So to have the chance to speak about this online, to meet you both here today, it's so special, and I feel like it's a wonderful way to spend a Sunday as well, a rejuvenating way to spend a Sunday before I go back to work at the university tomorrow.
Thank you very much to both of you. We've had Michael Leach, Ph.D., and Thelma T. Reyna, also Ph.D., and talking about their books and the poetry. In closing this show, I'm always moved by poets. Not so much their poetry, but the poets, the individuals who are willing to share their most inner feelings with everyone. And we get to sit back and learn from them and be touched by their emotions. But this is the first time I think I really starting to understand that this isn't just much of a exchange of creativity. It's a sense of wellness that you're right. I think we've been missing. I have interviewed several other individuals in preparation for the show who have a background in the medical fields. And what they share is that they're so busy learning the facts of the human body that they really do not get the humanities, and that they suffer from that. They know they're missing it, but they don't know why until they grasp it. And that comes across from Michael, that once you grasp the need for the humanities, for the creative thought process where people can explain their emotions, they find a foundation where they can continue to be successful in their field. So I get that across from both of you. I applaud your work. Thelma, through your wonderful work to bring together so many poets, and Michael to share his perspective down from beautiful Australia. I've been down there twice. It took me the second time to see kangaroos. I couldn't see them the first time. So I wear my Australian shirt down there. It's a beautiful, beautiful country. So thank you very much. And I look forward to having both of you in future shows and continuing to promote the idea that we need the humanities, humanistic medicine to be added on to not only the organic chemistry and all the other factors of medical science, but also to make this a better world. And thank you for taking the time. And with that, I wish you both a happy.
You're wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you and good night. Take
Many
care.
thanks.